Welcome to our deep dive into ancient history. It's perfect if you're studying for like UPSC exams, or maybe you're in 11th or 12th grade and this is part of your curriculum, or honestly, even if you're just curious about, the really, really distant past. We're going to cover it all.
Yeah, and we've got some amazing textbook excerpts that we're going to be using. They really do feel like we're stepping into a time machine, taking us back millions of years to when like the very first human-like creatures appeared.
Okay, so 5.6 million years ago. That is a seriously long time. How do we even wrap our heads around that?
Right, it's hard to grasp. It's like imagine human evolution as a book, right? And each page of that book represents like 10,000 years. Modern humans, us Homo sapiens, we only show up on the last couple of pages.
Oh, that puts it into perspective. And I know for a while scientists thought human evolution was this straight line, like we were marching directly towards becoming us. But it's way more complicated, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's definitely not a straight line. It's more like a bush with all kinds of branches. And some of those branches, they just stopped. They led to dead ends. A lot of human-like species, they evolved, they adapted to their environment, and eventually many of them, they vanished.
Survival of the fittest in action. But before we get too far, can we just clarify a few terms? Because I remember from my textbook, there's all these categories. Primates, hominoids, hominids. Gets a little confusing.
Yeah, for sure. It's easy to get them mixed up. Think of it like those Russian nesting dolls. So the biggest doll, that's primates. That's the whole group, monkeys, apes, and us humans too.
Okay.
Then inside that, you've got a smaller doll, and that's hominoids. That includes apes and humans.
Got it.
And then the tiniest doll in the center, that's hominids. That's every species on the human line, even the ones that aren't around anymore.
Okay, that actually makes it much clearer. So the textbook also have these really cool skull comparisons. You can see the differences between ape skulls, Australopithecus, Homo erectus, and, Homo sapiens. When you look at those kids, what really jumps out at you?
You can see the brain case getting bigger over time. And the jawline, it becomes less prominent, the teeth get smaller. And these changes weren't just random. They happened because our ancestors were adapting to their environment, to their lifestyle. Like a bigger brain means you can think better, solve problems, you're more adaptable.
Wow, it's amazing how much we can learn just from a skull. But back in the day, scientists didn't even believe in human evolution, right?
Right. The discovery of these really old human fossils, it totally shook things up. Like in the mid-1800s, most people believed that humans were a special creation, what they read in religious texts. So when they found these fossils that showed a totally different origin story, it challenged everything.
It's like new discoveries versus old beliefs. And sometimes they clash head on. Do you have a favorite example of this?
Oh, yeah, the story of the Neanderthal skull. Discovered in 1856. It's a classic. So picture this. Some workers are quarrying for limestone in Germany, and boom, they find this skull. And it's obviously not a modern human skull. The scientists at the time, they couldn't handle it. They just couldn't accept it.
It must have been so shocking to find something so different from what they expected. But then just a few years later, Darwin publishes On the Origin of Species, and it's like, boom, everything changes.
Totally. Darwin's theory of evolution gave everyone this new framework for understanding human origins. It was a scientific explanation for how we got here. So suddenly those fossils, they weren't just curiosities, they were proof of our evolutionary history.
It's like those fossils in Darwin's theory, they went hand in hand in rewriting how we understand human history.
Yeah.
But it's not just about finding the fossils, is it? There's this whole process of uncovering them, studying them carefully.
Absolutely. It's like super delicate detective work. In our textbook, it describes how archaeologists excavate these sites, using these grid squares and special tools to gently brush away layers of dirt and reveal these ancient treasures.
It sounds exciting and painstaking at the same time, which makes the Leakey's discovery in Olduvai Gorge even more amazing. They searched for 23 years in this really tough environment before Mary Leakey found that Australopithecus skull. I love that Louis Leakey described hearing Mary shout, "I've got him! I've got him!" It's like they found a long-lost friend.
It really shows their dedication.
Yeah.
And that Australopithecus skull, it might not be as advanced as later Homo species, but it's still a vital piece of the puzzle. They had smaller brains, they spent time in trees, but they walked upright. And that's a defining characteristic of our hominid ancestors.
It's like that was the first step towards becoming human, literally.
Speaking of steps, that reminds me of something else from the textbook. The positive feedback loop. It's this idea that as our ancestors started walking upright, their hands were free. So they could use them more, they became more dexterous. And that made them even better at walking upright. It's this amazing cycle.
Exactly. It's a perfect example of how evolution works. One change leads to another and another. And that positive feedback loop, it was crucial in helping early humans adapt to a changing planet. Around 2.5 million years ago, the Earth entered the Ice Age. Temperatures plummeted. Ice sheets covered huge areas. Sounds brutal. Did our ancestors just freeze to death?
Some species definitely couldn't adapt and they died out, but the Homo genus, that's our direct ancestors, they emerged during this time. They were able to adapt, they were innovative, and that's what helped them not just survive, but actually thrive in those harsh conditions.
So who are the big names in this Homo family tree? I know there's Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and of course Homo sapiens, but I'm a little fuzzy on the details.
Sure, so Homo habilis means handyman, and they were the tool makers. Then came Homo erectus, meaning upright man. And they were even better at walking upright. They had bigger brains. And finally, there's us Homo sapiens, the wise man, with the largest brains and the capacity for language and complex thought.
It's amazing how their names reflect their evolution getting more and more complex over time. But there's a question that's always bugged me. Where did Homo sapiens, modern humans, actually originate? I know there's some debate about this, right?
You're right. There are two main theories. The regional continuity model says that modern humans evolved in different parts of the world at the same time, like from existing Homo erectus populations.
So parallel evolution happening in different places.
Yeah, exactly. The other theory is called the replacement model, or the out of Africa theory. And it says that modern humans originated in one spot, probably Africa, and then spread out across the globe, replacing other Homo species they encountered along the way.
So which one is right?
The debate's still going on. Both theories have evidence to back them up, and that's what makes studying human evolution so exciting. There are still so many mysteries to solve.
Speaking of mysteries, let's talk about the daily lives of our ancient ancestors. How did they find food and shelter? I'm guessing it wasn't as simple as popping to the supermarket?
You got that right. From the evidence we have, it looks like they were hunter-gatherers. They hunted animals and gathered plants for food.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But how can we be sure? Plants don't fossilize the same way bones do, right?
It's true. Finding evidence of plant consumption is tricky. Sometimes we find carbonized plant remains that gives us clues about their diet, but there's also been debate about how much they relied on hunting versus scavenging. Were they actively hunting prey, or were they more like taking advantage of animals that were already dead?
So maybe not always those dramatic hunting scenes we see in movies.
Right. Scavenging was probably more common, especially early on. But as tools and techniques got better, we start to see evidence of planned hunting. Like they were getting more strategic about how they got their food. There are sites like Boxer Grove in England and Schoningen in Germany that show signs of large mammal butchery. So they were definitely capable of taking down some pretty big animals.
It's amazing how we can piece together their lives from these clues they left behind. But what about shelter? Did they have permanent homes? Or were they always on the move?
Well, the way artifacts are distributed, like those stone tools, can tell us a lot about their living patterns. If they found a bunch of tools clustered in one spot, it means they probably spent a good chunk of time there. Maybe because it was near food or water.
So just like us, they were drawn to places where they can meet their basic needs.
Yeah.
But did they eventually start creating more permanent shelters?
Yes. Over time, we start seeing caves being used as shelters, and even open-air shelters being built. The Lazarette Cave in France, for example, shows signs of a shelter built up against the cave wall. They even had hearths there and remnants of meals.
Sounds kind of cozy. But I'm guessing not all shelters were permanent, right? Some must have been more temporary, depending on the season.
Exactly. The Terra Amata site in France, they found traces of flimsy shelters made of wood and grasses. So that suggests they were still mobile, adapting to the changing seasons and where the resources were.
They were resourceful and adaptable, making the most of what their environment gave them. But there's one discovery that really changed everything for them: fire.
Absolutely. Fire was a game changer. Now, the very earliest evidence of fire is debated. Was it natural or did they control it? But we do find hearths at some sites, so they were definitely using fire deliberately. And fire would have been huge. It gave them warmth, light protection from predators, and they could cook food. That would have made a huge difference to their diet and health.
It's amazing to think how something we take for granted today would have been a life-changing discovery back then. Speaking of discoveries, let's talk about tools. I always think of those stone hand axes and choppers when I picture prehistoric tools. But I know there's more to the story than that.
Definitely. It's easy to think that tool use is something only humans do. But other animals use tools too, like birds and chimpanzees. What sets humans apart is how complex our tool making is, the planning and the memory involved. We weren't just reacting to immediate needs. We were thinking ahead, designing tools for specific
So
purposes.
it's more than just grabbing a stick to poke at something. It's about imagining and creating something new to solve a problem or make life easier.
Exactly. And the oldest evidence of stone toolmaking goes all the way back to 2 million years ago, found in Ethiopia and Kenya. Some scientists even think Australopithecus might have been making and using these early tools.
Wow, that pushes the timeline back even further. It seems like they were well on their way to becoming skilled tool makers. And as humans evolved, the tools got even more complex, didn't they?
Right. Around 35,000 years ago, we see spear throwers and bows and arrows appearing. They were developing more advanced hunting strategies. It really shows their ingenuity.
It must have revolutionized how they hunted, allowing them to take down larger prey from a safe distance. But tools weren't just for practical purposes, were they? They also played a role in early art, like those incredible cave paintings.
That's right. And we'll be diving deeper into those paintings soon. But even before that, with the development of the punch blade technique, early humans could make engravings on bone antler ivory. They were expressing themselves artistically way before those famous cave paintings.
It's like they had this creative spark, this need to express themselves, maybe even to communicate through these visual symbols. Which brings me to another big question. How did language come about? Was it a sudden thing, or did it evolve gradually?
That's one of the biggest mysteries in human evolution. Language is something that's unique to humans, but figuring out exactly when and how it began is tough. There are lots of theories. Some people think it started with gestures, others say maybe it was singing or humming first, and then some believe it evolved from primate calls that became more and more complex over time.
It's like trying to find the very first word ever spoken. Pretty daunting. Any clues about when spoken language might have emerged?
Hard to say for sure, but some scientists think it could have been as early as 2 million years ago, when Homo habilis appeared. Their brains show development in the areas that are linked to language. But the vocal tract that we need for complex speech didn't fully develop until much later, maybe around 200,000 years ago, around the time modern humans emerged.
So the mystery continues. But there's a really interesting theory that connects the development of language to those cave paintings. Could it be that they were communicating through both spoken words and visual symbols? To find out more, we need to take a closer look at those enigmatic cave paintings.
Those cave paintings are just mind-blowing, aren't they? They really give us a peek into the minds of our ancestors, their beliefs, their connection to nature. It's incredible.
I know, I can only imagine what it would be like to stand in one of those caves and just see these paintings that have been there for like tens of thousands of years. It must feel like they're whispering secrets from the past.
It really does. And one of the most famous discoveries is the Altamira cave in Spain. The story of how it was discovered is amazing. A little girl named Maria was exploring the cave with her dad, who was an amateur archaeologist, and she suddenly shouted, "Look, Papa Oxen!" She'd found the paintings on the ceiling.
Wow, so a kid made one of the most important archaeological discoveries. That's incredible. What a moment for both of them.
It was, but sadly, the scientific community at the time, they didn't believe it. They couldn't accept that prehistoric people could create such sophisticated art. It took like 20 years for them to finally acknowledge that the paintings were real.
Talk about a missed opportunity.
Oh.
So what do these paintings actually depict? What kind of images did they create?
Well, the Altamira cave, along with others like Lascaux and Chauvet in France, are just covered in hundreds of images, mostly animals. There are bison, horses, ibex, deer, mammoths, rhinos, even lions, bears, and panthers.
It's like a visual record of the Ice Age world they lived in. But I'm guessing there's more to it than that, right? There must be a deeper meaning behind their choices.
Right. It's what makes cave art so fascinating and also so hard to interpret. Like, why are some areas of the caves painted and others not? Why did they choose to show certain animals and not others? And why are men often depicted alone or in groups, while women are only shown in groups?
It's like a giant puzzle they left for us to solve.
Yeah.
So what are some of the theories about why they created these paintings?
One of the main theories is that they were connected to hunting rituals. Like, they painted these animals to ensure a successful hunt, almost like a form of sympathetic magic.
So they thought if they captured the animal in their art, it would somehow influence the outcome of the hunt? I can see how that would make sense to them.
Right. It's a way of trying to control what you can't control, appealing to the spiritual realm for help. Another theory is that these caves were meeting places, maybe for sharing knowledge, telling stories, or having ceremonies.
I can picture them huddled around a fire, the cave walls lit up by torches, sharing stories of the hunt, passing down knowledge to the next generation with these amazing images all around them.
It's a powerful image. And some of the paintings are in areas with great acoustics, which suggests that sound, maybe even music or chanting, might have been part of those gatherings.
So they were stimulating all the senses, creating a truly immersive experience. It's amazing how much we can learn about their lives from these paintings.
It is. But every answer we find just leads to more questions. It's what makes archaeology so captivating. It's like piecing together a giant puzzle with some pieces missing, and each new discovery sheds light on a different part of the picture.
Definitely. And as we continue to piece together this puzzle of the past, I'm wondering if there are any groups living today that can help us understand these ancient hunter-gatherers. Can we learn anything about the past by studying how people live now?
That's a great question, and it's something anthropologists debate a lot. Some believe that studying modern-day hunter-gatherers can give us valuable insights into the past, while others say we have to be careful about making direct comparisons.
I can see how it would be tempting to look at them as a window into a way of life that's long gone.
Exactly. And there have been some fascinating encounters between modern societies and these isolated groups. Our textbook mentions one from 1870 when a pastoral group in Africa met the Kungsan, a hunter-gatherer society living in the Kalahari Desert.
I'm curious, what were their first impressions of each other?
Well, the pastoral group thought the Kungsan were weak and easy to control because they were afraid of strangers and would often hide. But, as we'll see, first impressions can be deceiving.
Don't judge a book by its cover.
Yeah.
Are there any other modern-day hunter-gatherer groups that have been studied in detail?
Yeah, the Hadza, who live near Lake Eyasi in Tanzania, they've been the focus of a lot of research. Our textbook actually has a whole section about them, written by an anthropologist who lived with them in 1960.
What makes the Hadza so interesting to study? What can we learn from them?
Well, their environment is teeming with wildlife. They hunt zebra, buffalo, giraffes, even lions, but surprisingly, most of their diet comes from plants. About 80% is plant-based, only 20% is meat and honey.
Wow, that's a lot more plant-based than I expected. It challenges the whole man-the-hunter stereotype we often have about ancient societies.
It does. And here's another interesting thing about the Hadza. They don't believe in owning land or resources. Anyone can live wherever they want and hunt and gather freely.
That's so different from how we view land ownership and resources today. It sounds like a very egalitarian society.
It is. And their camps are constantly moving depending on the season and where the water is. During the wet season, they spread out in smaller groups, but in the dry season, they come together near the few remaining water sources.
It's like they're dancing with nature, constantly adapting to the environment. But can we really compare these modern hunter-gatherers to our ancient ancestors? I mean, their lives are so different in many ways, aren't they?
That's the big question. While there are definitely similarities, it's important to remember that today's hunter-gatherer societies live in much tougher conditions. They're often marginalized, pushed to the edges by modern society. Their way of life is threatened in a way that it wasn't for early humans.
So there's not a perfect replica of the past, but we can still learn from them, right?
Absolutely. Even with the differences, studying modern hunter-gatherers helps us understand the incredible range of human behavior and how adaptable we are. They show us that it's possible to live in harmony with nature, with different social structures and ways of relating to our environment.
So the takeaway is to be cautious about making direct comparisons, but to keep an open mind and see what we can learn from them about human resilience, ingenuity, and our connection to nature.
Couldn't have said it better myself. By looking at both the archaeological evidence and the lives of these modern-day hunter-gatherers, we can build more complete and nuanced understanding of our shared human past.
It's a journey of discovery that never really ends. So we've traveled a long way in this deep dive, from those very first steps of our hominid ancestors millions of years ago, to the development of tools, art, and language, all the way to the complex societies of hunter-gatherers.
We've seen how they adapted, innovated, and created meaningful lives in all sorts of challenging environments. But the story doesn't stop there. They were about to experience a truly monumental shift, the transition from a nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyle to one based on agriculture and settled life.
That's right, a change that would completely transform human history and lead to the world we live in today.
It's wild to think about, isn't it? For millions of years, our ancestors lived without agriculture. No farming, no domesticated animals. It's a way of life that's hard for us to even imagine now.
I know, right? We just take agriculture for granted. But it was a total game changer, a turning point in human history. It led to settled communities, larger populations, and eventually civilizations.
Exactly. And it wasn't like a sudden overnight change. It was a gradual process that took thousands of years. It all started around the end of the last ice age, about 13,000 years ago. The planet warmed up, and those conditions were perfect for wild grasses to grow, like barley and wheat.
So the Earth's climate shifted, And that had a domino effect on plants and animals,
Yeah.
creating the perfect environment for agriculture to emerge.
Right. Forests and grasslands spread, which meant there were more animals too. Wild sheep, goats, cattle. Hunter-gatherers had more than enough food, and it makes sense they'd want to stay in these areas instead of constantly moving around.
Yeah, I can see why they'd want to stick around. But how did they go from gathering to actually cultivating and controlling these resources?
Well, as they spent more time in these areas, they started paying closer attention to the plants and animals. They learned about the cycles of growth and reproduction, when to harvest, what factors affected how much food they got.
It's like they were the first botanists and zoologists.
Pretty much. And as their knowledge grew, they started intentionally planting seeds, cultivating crops, and even domesticating animals. They weren't just taking what nature gave them anymore, they were actively shaping their environment and their food supply.
That shift from relying on nature to producing food must have been huge. It would have required a whole new skill set. Do we know where this agricultural revolution first started?
One of the earliest known centers of agriculture is the Fertile Crescent. It stretches from the Mediterranean coast all the way to the Zagros Mountains in Iran. It had everything you need for agriculture to take off fertile soil, lots of water, and a huge variety of plants and animals that were perfect for domestication.
Fertile Crescent, the name says it all. No wonder it became a cradle of civilization. What happened when people settled down in communities? Did their lives change drastically?
Big time. Agriculture led to a ton of new innovations and social changes. They started building more permanent homes using mud bricks or even stone. Pottery became more widespread because they needed to store all that extra grain and produce.
Sounds like a whole new world was opening up for them. New challenges and new opportunities. Did they invent new tools too? I bet those old hunting tools weren't so useful for farming.
You got it. They needed new tools like plows, which made it way easier to farm larger areas. And then they discovered how to work with metals like copper and tin, which led to even more technological advancements.
It's like one thing led to another, propelling them forward towards more complex and sophisticated ways of living.
For sure. And with settled life came the need for new ways to organize themselves and govern. As their communities grew bigger and more complex, they needed ways to manage resources, solve conflicts, keep things in order. It was the beginning of what we now call civilization.
So from those early experiments with farming and domestication, a whole new world was born, a world of villages and cities and complex societies. It's mind-blowing to think about. This journey from nomadic hunter-gatherers to settled farmers, all because of this one revolutionary change, agriculture. What do you think sparked this shift? Was it just the environment, or were there other things going on?
That's a question that's been puzzling scholars for ages. It was probably a combination of things, those favorable environmental conditions, definitely, but also things like population growth, their increasing knowledge of plants and animals, maybe even a desire for a more stable food supply.
So it was a perfect storm of events that pushed them in this new direction.
Exactly. And we have to remember that the shift to agriculture didn't happen everywhere at the same time or in the same way. It happened differently in different parts of the world, each with its own unique circumstances and innovations.
It just goes to show how adaptable and creative humans are.
Yeah.
That agriculture sprang up independently in so many places. But one thing's for sure, agriculture had a monumental impact on our species. It completely changed how we live, how we interact with each other, and how we shape the world around us. For better or for worse, it put us on the path to where we are today.
That's a great way to put it. It's a story of human innovation and adaptation. It really shows the triumph of the human spirit when faced with change.
So there you have it. From the very first steps of our ancestors to the rise of agriculture and the birth of civilization. What an incredible journey through ancient history. We've explored the key events, the discoveries, and the people that shaped humanity.
And remember, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many more stories to uncover, so many mysteries to solve. The journey of discovery never really ends.
Absolutely. So stay curious. Keep asking questions and keep exploring the amazing world of ancient history. Who knows what incredible discoveries are still out there waiting to be found. Until next time, happy exploring, everyone.